Hello everyone, coming to you after a long break. This is July 10, 2018, and I'm recording my first video in about half a year. So I played a very good tournament, Twin Ports tournament in Superior, Wisconsin. This was the 7th edition of this tournament, and this is my first time playing it. I really love going out there, and I have some good friends. People are very nice, and tournament is very well organized. In the tournament, there were 5 rounds. I played 4 games. I took one half-point bye. I ended up winning 2 games, drawing one against the Grandmaster, and losing a tough battle in the last round for the total of 3 points out of 5, and a gain of about 7 rating points. And today I want to start going over my round one, where my opponent was Benjamin Gumby, the 1822 rated local player. And the time control for this game was game in 60 minutes with 30-second increment. One thing I want to talk about is what I strive to do with my games. After I play them, I come home and I enter the game into my chess base, and I try to write down my thoughts. You will see there is a lot of word annotations, what I was thinking, what I saw, and only after that I try to run my game through the engine. And if I get a chance to review my game with a coach or a high-rated player in between recording my thoughts and running through the engine, that's the most ideal. That is why you will see some assessments that are not correct, like some things I thought during the game which objectively are untrue. So this version of annotation that you see here is the version where I already recorded my thoughts and also ran my game through the engine. It's a very interesting game, so let's get to it. And in this game, I chose to play the opening that's called English Defense. So this is a hyper-modern opening where White tries to build a big, strong, classical center, and Black is trying to undermine the center with pawn breaks. So Black gives up a pawn center first, and then it's going to try to hit with the center with various breaks, such as f5 or c5 or d5, depending on what White does. And I do play a lot of hyper-modern openings with both colors, so this fits my style. After bishop b7, Black is putting pressure onto this e4 pawn. So whatever White does, White has to take care of this problem. So White would usually go knight c3 or bishop d3. And the more rare moves are d5 and what my opponent played, queen c2. And queen c2 is most famous for the game played in 1977 in the candidates match between Lev Pologoyevsky and Viktor Korchnoi. And Viktor Korchnoi, at the time of that game, had some British players helping him. I think it was Tony Miles, but I'm not sure. And English Defense was in his repertoire as one of his backup openings. So he probably caught Lev Pologoyevsky by surprise by playing this Queen h4 move, which is designed to put more pressure onto the e4 pawn. And White has to react, so White plays bishop to d3, and now Black plays f5. But there's also a possibility of going knight c6, but we're not going to look into it at the moment. So f5, you see Black's whole strategy is designed to attack White's center from a distance. The typical hyper-modern way to handle the center. And it's a bit unusual because rather than in classical approach where you develop knights first, Black actually develops bishops here first and a queen before knights join the action. So there is not a lot of games in the database here. It's less than 20 games that are played in the master level. So relatively unexplored territory. And knight d2 was played in Pologoyevsky-Korchnoi game, but my opponent Ben plays g3. And already here I I noted in my commentary that my opponent spent 11 minutes to this point on lane move 6. So it's good to have your opponents on the unfamiliar turf, as your opponent will tend to spend more time in the opening, and which might result in your opponent not having enough time in late in the game, which actually what happened in this game. My opponent ended up making a mistake in the equal position, where had he had more time to figure out everything that was going on, he probably would have found the defensive resources, and the game would have probably ended in a draw. So in this position, my queen has to move. I was choosing between two moves here, queen to h5 and queen to f6. And I chose queen f6 after thinking for about 5 minutes. The upside of queen f6 is it attacks this pawn on d4. So now we are kind of switching our focus from attacking the e pawn to attacking the d pawn. The downside of this move, of course, is the queen takes a place that reserved for this knight on g8. Okay, so the opponent thinks for 8 minutes and plays d5. And with d5, he's taking away the c6 square from my knight, so my knight can only be developed to one spot, and that's to a6. And as you see, these two arrows right here, there are two ideas for black. One idea is to fork the queen and the bishop and force a trade of a knight for bishop, giving black the bishop pair advantage. Or the other possibility is if white reacts with a3, which was what I actually expected him to do. Now I can actually play knight to c5 and put more pressure onto e4 pawn, as well as giving myself an option to trade for the bishop. So what I'm going to do next will depend a lot on how white would respond. To my slight surprise, my opponent did not stop knight b4. He played knight to c3, and so I accept the invitation, attacking his queen and the bishop. Queen moves, and at first my plan was to simply play knight takes d3 check, and that's actually what the engine I use. It's a bit old, but still a good engine, Goodini 3. The engine really likes trading on d3. And then the engine simply recommends taking on e4, destroying white's center, and if white takes with a queen, we can play bishop b4, pinning the knight and threatening bishop takes c3. And let's say knight e2, we can play knight e7, we can play castle, and here white has advantage due to the fact, black has an advantage due to the fact that black has control of the light squares, pressure on the f-file, as well as pressure on white's center. In the other line, where white takes on e4, attacking our queen, we can play check, and then after something like king f1, we can play queen f7. So here again we have a bishop pair, and we forced white's king to move. So there's some advantage in these lines. However, once we got to the point, I saw a different idea which I could play, which I really liked at the moment, which objectively not nearly as good as simply taking on d3. My idea was to play queen d4, force my opponent to play bishop b1, and then once the bishop moves, there is less defense of the c4 pawn. And also notice how my bishop here is not very useful. It's completely blocked by white's pawns. By playing bishop a6, I can actually relocate my bishop to a different diagonal and make my bishop useful with putting the pressure on the c4 pawn. And notice how it's not possible for white to play b3 because b pawn is guarding the knight. So I thought this was quite interesting. And the move my opponent played was just taking the f pawn. The engine recommends playing knight to f3, forcing the queen trade. And then there is some really interesting trap which I did not see at all. So white can take on e6, and let's say black just automatically recaptures back. That's already completely losing for black, because white can play this move knight 95, attacking the bishop, and now if bishop a6, a3, and it's funny, black's knight is actually trapped. You might say, well, but we can play bishop d6, and if white knight leaves, then we can play knight c6 and save our knight, but simply white takes, if black takes knight, this a file now opened up, and white can just capture the bishop, and that's game over. So against the e, we would have to play something like knight f6, which was a very, I would say, complex queenless middle game with about equal chances. But there is nothing wrong with what my opponent chose. He takes on f5, just like I actually expected him to do. And I take with the bishop. And now my opponent plays queen h5 check. So as I wrote down in my annotations here, everything is forced up to this point. I mean, bishop takes e4 and queen h5 moves are first. And here I have a major decision point. And I have to decide between two options. Putting my king to d8 or playing g6. If I play g6, I'm most likely giving up a pawn. The upside is I get to castle my king and I get to coordinate my pieces. With king d8, I thought I don't give up a pawn. So I fought for 4 minutes and I chose king d8 move, which proves to be a major mistake, and it gives white quite a bit of an advantage. The alternative g6 white would take. Here I can play knight f6 or castle. And this is what I overlooked. It's kind of funny. I was afraid of this g7 check, but of course this is a huge blunder by white, because I can simply take his queen, and as he makes his new queen, well, the pieces can move backwards, and I can simply play queen takes h8. But for some reason in my calculation, I completely overlooked the fact that my queen from d4 is guarding my rook on h8. So I can play castle, which is what I most likely would have played if I played hg. And now the game could have gone like this. Let's say knight f3, take. This is a line, it's just a simple line I got from the engine. Just kind of get an idea how the action could have continued. White is up 2 pawns, but white is severely underdeveloped. Rook e8 can be met by knight g5, a very good move. And now something like this could be possible, where white is still up a couple of pawns, but black surely have compensation. I would probably prefer to play white here, because material is material. If you can coordinate your pieces, you're going to be up a pawn. But objectively, it's probably around equal. But okay, this is if white finds all the best moves. There's probably a lot of lines where I can keep queens on the board and have a strong dynamic compensation for my pawn. So what I overlooked with king d8 is the fact that the opponent can play knight to f3. And now my intention originally was to play queen d3, but now I notice after knight e5, my queen is, knight d3 check, take, knight e5. There is no checks of any kind. There is no mate of any kind. And the biggest problem is white has this knight f7 check winning my queen. So for example, here, he will trade, and then I'm losing. But I do have the defense that is saving the day with knight f6. And now my opponent took on d4, trading queens. Again, this is a point where the engine disagrees. So during the game, I was afraid of bishop g5. And I thought, if I was white at this point, I'm not trading queens, I'm keeping the tension. And I already started kind of feeling not so good about my position and regretting my king d8 decision around this point. I was going to play queen c5, which is not the most optimal. Computer recommends playing bishop e7. With bishop e7, we renew the threat of taking on h5, as we are unpinning our knight. And then it's possible to play something like this. But this knight b5 move would be hard for me to find, I think. But if I did find it, then I'm doing okay. Despite I've been down a pawn, my pieces are well coordinated, and the big problem with White's position is the fact that he has difficulty castling due to the bishop on c4, preventing the legal castle. My opponent took on d4 and I took on h5, and now he has a very strong move. This move is taken on e6, but with a d pawn. And now my best move is knight f6. What I was going to play, however, is c5. And now after knight f3, White's doing great. White's pieces are much better coordinated, and he certainly has quite a bit of an advantage. My opponent took with an f-pawn, and now I took on d5. I was a bit scared of his bishop e4 move, putting a lot of pressure on d5, but luckily for me I have bishop b4. And as I wrote down here, it's quite possible that we might end up in a position where White has a bishop pair. And if that happens with a bishop pair in a relatively open position, that would give White an edge. But this was not as bad as it seems. This bishop e4 move is not as scary as it seems, actually. My opponent takes on d7. Now I captured on c3. And instead of recapturing immediately, Benjamin plays bishop g5 check. It's a really good move, I think. He develops with the tempo. And here I have a choice between taking on d7 and playing bishop to e7. I relatively quickly took on d7. Here my opponent already 40 minutes in with 20 minutes left for the game, and I have 26 minutes left. So not a lot of time, relatively quick time control. Bishop e7 seems to be okay. So during the game I was a little bit concerned about bishop f5, which has a trap. If I take on g5, knight c6 is a very nice checkmate. But fortunately for black, black has this bishop d5 defense, and now I think black is actually doing great, because remember, he took on c3, so black still up a piece, and now the rook is hanging on h1. So it's great for black. But I did take on d7. Now my opponent throws another intermezzo at me, and I don't have any other move here really but king d6, and White takes on c3. And here we have a position where material is equal, of course, but White is ready to castle long, and Black's king is unsafe, and Black's pieces are all over the place. Coordination is relatively poor, and the king's not in the game. So I was realizing actually that I did face a lot of issues in this game. And I think, thinking back to this position, I think what I should be striving for is to attempt trading one of the minor pieces, because if I manage to do that, then my king will have more squares to hide on, and the danger to my king is real, as I will show you in the upcoming variations. So the move I prefer here is bishop e7, I think, looking back at it. But during the game, I relatively quickly, after only thinking for about a minute, played c5. And my opponent here fought for about 4 minutes and played bishop g4. And I did analyze this game with Grandmaster Brian Smith, and Brian found this really nice resource, castle long. And the problem for black is, if he takes, which I mean I think kind of have to take, rook takes, king c5, and now bishop e3 looks very scary. For example, knight f6, king c2, knight d5 leads to a very cute checkmate, like this. There is a lot of tricks in this position that black must avoid. I mean, it's a very, very unpleasant position here. There is a trick here that doesn't work, like you might say, okay, white can win a rook, but this actually doesn't work because black responds with this bishop a3 check, picking up a rook back. Objectively speaking, the best move for white is rook e4 check, king moves, check, and now rook d1. And but in a very open position, having an extra pawn and a bishop pair, white is doing great. White has a big advantage. Although the game is still not over, black can try to fight. Bishop g4 is a mistake. Mistake in the sense that it leads to a roughly equal position rather than leading to a position where white has a big edge, as the other line does. So I took on d4, bishop takes h3, and now we take on c3. Black won a pawn, but black's king is very unsafe, and black's pieces are poorly coordinated with bishop and rook having a difficult time to be developed. So the game now becomes like this. Can black escape the danger and survive with an extra pawn? One of the defensive resources in positions like this is to give up your extra material for the king's safety. So I always had this in the back of my mind. So castle, logical move. The only place where I can reasonably try to hide is on the queen side, because I have some pawns that I can use as a shelter, or possibly my f8 bishop can come to c5 and cover up my king. So I went king c5, rook h3, king b5. So if it is rook e5 check, for example, we can try to shield ourselves with bishop c5. King c2. This move actually doesn't threaten anything at the moment, because on king takes c3 we can play bishop b4 check, but at the same time white might throw rook b1 check first, force me to remove my king from b5 to a square where the king is no longer can support the bishop b4 check. So I wasn't sure what to do here, and I found this move rook c8, and as I pointed out in my notes, it allows me to do a couple of things. Number one, there is an immediate threat of discover check, so king takes c3 is of course horrible, because I can just do something like this and win some material. And the other possibility is I can try to place my rook either to c5 with threats along the fifth rank, or I can try to relocate my rook to the e file, which is actually what happened. So I went rook c5, rook c7, rook e7, as you will see shortly. So bishop g4, attacking my rook, rook c5, bishop e3, and now that he has blocked the e file, I can play rook c7, bishop f4, rook e7. Please notice that at this point, unless it fails tactically, strategically, any trade favors black, because any trade that can happen makes it easier for black to defend. Here white had a very interesting resource with a4 check, sacrificing the pawn in order to open up my king. I would have to take, and then after bishop d7, I'm forced to sacrifice my exchange. So I would have a couple of pawns for the exchange. Obviously white cannot take on c3 because of bishop b4 check, winning the rook. And now after a5, we have a very interesting position where black has a bunch of pawns but still struggling to develop at king side. So not sure about this position, especially with both of us being in time trouble. But luckily for me, my opponent did not find this resource. He played bishop d7 check, which is also a good move. Contains a little trap. If, let's say, I go to b4, now I lose material to bishop d6 check, so I have to play king a5. And now bishop e5, the move that I really like. My opponent plays a good move. He is ready to recover his pawn on c3 while keeping his better position. So at this point, I played b5, where my intention was to both interpose with b4 if needed, or give my king more squares to hide. Objectively speaking, the best move for black was rook f7, and now on bishop takes c3 check, Black can reply bishop b4, finally developing this bishop, rook e5 check b5, and something like this, where white's pieces are better for sure, but black is still in the game, and black managed to develop the bishop, and now the h8 rook can join the action as well. So after this b5 move, I would, if I were white, I would simply take on c3. Just give me my pawn back. I still have a good position. Basically, as poker players would say, I'm free rolling. Like, I'm not risking much. I'm not down any material. I have good position. But computer likes rook e4 here. That's kind of the engine move. My opponent, however, in this position, fell for the temptation of going for cheapos. That's what I think happened. So he had 6 minutes before this move, so he spends 3 minutes, plays bishop c7 check. And I have 10 minutes on my clock. I have 3 different legal moves possible here, 2 of which lose immediately. King b4 we already covered. Bishop d6 wins material. And king a6 leads to mate in 1, bishop c8. So I play king a4, and now we get this trade-in. And as I pointed out here, black is super happy to make trade, because this alleviates the pressure on black's position. And after king takes c3, on a short time, my opponent was probably thinking that he recovered his pawn and his bishops are controlling a lot of squares, making it difficult for my rook to be developed. However, tactically, I can win a pawn again with bishop f6 check, pushing this king away, and now capturing the a2 pawn. And there is no rook a1 because my bishop from f6 is covering the a1 square. However, again, despite of the fact that black won the pawn, white has plenty of compensation to be equal, and he finds this rook d6 move, threatening, of course, rook a6, which would win the bishop or a pawn. So with the help of a couple of intermezzos, bishop b3 check and king b4, I managed to remove both my bishop and my king from the a file. Nevertheless, still rook a6, threatening threatening the pawn. And it appears that I can't actually save a pawn, because if, let's say, I play bishop d4, now I think white can go something like bishop d6. And if I get too stubborn with king c4, well, here's the checkmate. So these white bishops are very, very dangerous. And if I play bishop c5, now, of course, this becomes possible. And you'll see something similar will happen in the game. But here I still play bishop c3 check, king d3, and again, this is not just a simple king move. White is threatening to play bishop d6, mate in 1. So again, bishop c4 check. We need to push this king away from d3, king c2, and now bishop d4, guarding the a pawn, attacking the f2 pawn, and now my opponent plays bishop d6 check. Only move for me is to play bishop c5, take, and rook takes a7. Going into this position, my opponent has 2 minutes left. Per my notes, less than 2 minutes actually, and I have 8 minutes. And he's been playing basically the last 8 or 9 moves or so, having less than a minute. So every time you make a move, you get additional 30 seconds. And I was going into this position consciously, already seeing the trick. And the trick is, I play rook f8 first, threatening to take on f2. Of course, white's only reply is f4. And now I play rook f7, pinning my opponent's bishop across the 7th rank. And not just pinning the bishop, but threatening a move like king b6, where I would attack my opponent's rook, force my opponent's rook off the 7th rank, and pick up a bishop, which of course would lead to a win. And here, with very little time on his clock, my opponent commits a decisive mistake in the position, which is objectively equal. Practically, I could have probably pushed for a win, considering that I had more time and a more active king. So let's first see what white should do to escape this situation. The only good move for white is rook b7. He played rook c7, which we'll see shortly. And after rook b7, the trick is on king d6, he has a bishop move, such as bishop c8, where he both removes his bishop and protects his rook. And against bishop d5, he can take on b5, king c4. Now you might say, okay, what happens now? Bishop e8. So now he's counterattacking. Rook e7, and now rook b8. He can guard his bishop this way. Rook e2 check, and rook takes h2. His king is cut off, and my king is way more active, but that's not. It should not be enough objectively to win. Engine evaluates his position as completely equal. And then I think the other line where instead of going bishop d5, I play king d6. Sorry, we already looked at that. Here in this line, if I go king d6, I think bishop e8, and now let's say rook f8, rook b8, king e7, rook b5, and here I have to be careful because I might be down. I might end up in the ending down the pawn, and I have to be the one fighting for a draw here. While in the other line here that I analyzed by myself, king c7, rook b5, takes, check, here take. That's of course is a draw. So let's see what happened in the game. Rook c7, check, king d6, and now the problem for white is he is double attacked. His bishop is attacked twice with only one defense. His rook is attacked. So if he moves a bishop, he loses a rook. If he moves a rook, he loses a bishop. So he decides to sacrifice the exchange, but unfortunately for him, this c-pawn decides this is just really easy to win. There's many ways to win this. He kind of played a few more moves on autopilot. King c5, h4, king d4, h5, rook a7, bishop f5, h6, g4. And now I simply decided to win the f-pawn. And I mean, everything wins. For those of you guys who are maybe low-rated players and might wonder what's like the way to win this game, well, a simple plan would be to take the f-pawn, then just sacrifice an exchange for bishop, and then this king goes and eats all the pawns, and we might even end up giving up the c-pawn. But in the end, we're going to have a king and connected pass pawns, which will decide the game. So this was an interesting game, a game where my low-rated opponent, my opponent was rated about 400 points lower than me, gave me a really good fight, and he had an upper hand for most of the game. But you know, when you keep fighting and you hang on, sometimes you get a lucky break like that, and managed to escape this round 1 game, which was played on June 30th, with a win. And after that, I decided to take a bye in round 2, and round 3 was played on the same day, later that night, with a time control of 90 plus 30. And my next video will be dedicated to that round 2 game, round 3 game on June 30th in Twin Ports Open 7. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe and come back.